Welcome. This is the Thinking About Tomorrow webinar, and so glad you're able to participate. Things are changing, no question about it, in this world we live in, and particularly as a business owner or operator or somebody that interacts with the public. The rules seem to change every day, and they certainly did yesterday, as a matter of fact. So I thought it would really be good to get together with some lawyers of that really prominent law firm in Orange County that really can talk to all of us about some of the things we think about, but we certainly don't understand from a business perspective unless we do have this expertise from good lawyers. So today we're with Fenstermacher and Alisha Patterson with the law firm of Rutan and Tucker. They're really an Orange County firm, but we can't really say that because they have offices in the Bay Area and Silicon Valley. They practice throughout the United States in areas of land use and public law and corporate law and a variety of very, very important things. And but these two really understand a lot of the business issues and public government issues from both sides of that equation. So let me introduce Alan. So this is the quick bio. He's a partner at Rutan and Tucker in the land use, entitlement, and government and regulatory section. Regularly works with private businesses needing permits from local and state agencies and assists these parties comply with a wide range of regulatory requirements, including environmental issues. His particular specialty is obtaining entitlements for development and defending developers and public agencies in the CEQA land use process. Alisha is a partner also at Rutan and Tucker. She specializes in land use and municipal law. Currently, she's the city attorney for the city of Claremont, and she previously was the assistant city attorney in the city of Irvine. She works with developers and businesses who need entitlements, permits from government agencies, and defends government approvals from challenges and litigations. She's a specialist in ADA, Americans with Disability Act, compliance, and defense. So those are the two people here. I think their credentials speak for themselves, but also they're nice folks and hopefully can explain things in a little less than legalese to all of us who don't have a law degree. So with that, why don't we just start? Yesterday, as every day it seems, the governor steps forward to the microphone and tells us right up front where we have been good and where we have been bad, and brings about some changes in these executive orders that he's allowed to make under the emergency powers of the state. So yesterday, what changes happened?
I'm going to take this one. So yesterday at the press conference, Governor Newsom announced that for 19 counties that had been on his monitoring list for 3 days or more, and those counties include Orange, Los Angeles, Riverside, and San Bernardino, certain businesses were going to need to close their indoor operations to the public. And that includes restaurants, that's probably the one that's gotten the most press, wineries, tasting rooms, a variety of entertainment venues like movie theaters, family entertainment centers, museums, zoos, card rooms. In those counties, bars also need to close entirely. You can't do indoor or outdoor operations if you're a bar. And he expects that order to be in place for at least the next 3 weeks. So pretty rough news for restaurant and entertainment industries right before the 4th of July.
Yeah, you know, forgive me if I go there, but it seems like all the fun stuff he passed an order before a 3-day weekend to ban. So of course that wasn't done for that reason, but it sure feels that way to my restaurant friends and bar patron friends. So, hey, Alan, how does the state go about enforcing something like that? Because the governor also talked, I think for the first time I really heard it in his press conference yesterday, about setting up a state strike team of different folks from different state agencies, enforcement officers from different state agencies, to really try to enforce these types of closures, and specifically this order. So how do you, I mean, I caught you off guard because I had.
Yeah, no, I think it remains to be seen a little bit because, under the original order, it's really been left up to, county by county basis. And you have some cities and counties, taking a very hard line. We were actually talking before it started. Alisha reminded me that in the city of LA was even thinking about turning off utilities at one point. But then you have sheriffs in other counties that are basically saying, we're not going to enforce this. We're not going to make criminals out of our business people. And some local sheriffs have come out and said that. So I imagine that's why we see these strong words from the state talking about potentially some sort of statewide enforcement. I think we saw some CHP involvement with the beach closures here in Orange County, a month or so ago, whenever that was. So I think we may be seeing a heavier hand from the state, and I know there's been threats about potentially losing certain licenses, like from the ABC and that kind of thing.
Right, but Alisha, you've seen some of this in terms of some of that early on enforcement, and it really has to do with warning those businesses and going in and trying to deal with them. Is that kind of the tact you see the state and locals taking in terms of enforcing some of the orders?
So on my end, I do a lot of work in LA County, which I think has been on the more aggressive end in terms of enforcement compared to especially a county like Orange County. I still have not seen heavy-handed enforcement by government agencies, counties, cities, or even the state. I've seen a lot of courtesy warnings, and for the most part, I think a lot of businesses comply when they're told what you're doing is violating health orders. Some things that businesses might want to think about, though, even if you're not going to get a fine or imprisonment, like Ellen said, some cities in the past, like LA, have threatened to shut off utilities of businesses that aren't complying or revoke permits, licenses. So you should be aware of that. And then outside of that, I think it's important for businesses to keep in mind that if you're operating in violation of a health order, the scope of your liability, if something goes wrong under those conditions, could be a lot greater. If a regular negligence case, you would need to prove up a whole bunch of factors. But if you're operating in violation of a statute or an order, you could be subject to something called negligence per se. You could also have issues with your insurance coverage. So if you are going to open or try to roll the dice and open in violation of orders, I would definitely think through those potential consequences too.
Yeah, we understand though, you can't roll the dice anymore. All gambling facilities are closed, I heard. So.
The card rooms are specifically closed. Not if it's a tribal casino, those are not subject to the state health orders.
So my friend Brian just here sent a note, and it just reminded me that everybody who's participating now, if you have a question, you go down to the little Q&A box there and press it and let me know. Or if you just want to say something nice and friendly like Brian did, that would be nice. You can do that through the chat. But please, we're open for questions. I'm going to just work through kind of this flow, but I'd really like to hear any thoughts that people may have, because the one thing that kind of comes up that from my state legislative time, and during some of that, there were states of emergency when we had earthquakes, and Pete Wilson declared a state of emergency during the whole Northridge earthquake. And in fact, rebuilding some of those bridges, because taking the emergency powers that the governor had at that time to really shorten some of this time frame on CEQA compliance and things like that, that in fact, bridges and roadways got rebuilt in a very quick time frame because of those emergency powers. So we're seeing the emergency powers certainly from the governor on the state level, and we're even seeing them on county boards of supervisors or directives or direct orders from county health officers. And as you pointed out, Alisha, in some cities there are separate orders. Who really is in charge? I mean, if which should businesses pay attention to?
All of the above. And that's one of the issues, is that there's so many layers of government right now that are issuing orders that don't necessarily gel together. So definitely the state is supreme. Federal government to some extent, although they've been more hands-off. You need to look at your county health orders as well. And then some cities, a lot of cities have also issued their own health orders. So you need to look at all three. When folks come to me, I look at the jurisdiction and I basically do a table of all three, and whichever is the strictest is what's going to more or less govern.
Is that right? So there's no getting out of some of this stuff if the Orange County Health Officer or the Board of Supervisors here isn't as strict on something as the governor is. the hierarchy is there, that the state supersedes everything else and the county supersedes what the city may want to do. And then you have a potential city enforcement beyond that.
I think almost all the orders that I've seen to date have said that they're not going to supersede an order that's more strict from a different governmental entity. So like the state has carved out and said if counties want to be more strict, do more closures, they're welcome to do that. Counties have said the same for cities. So yeah, typically to the extent they don't, to the extent there's conflicts, the more restrictive rule is going to prevail.
Yeah, I think a good way to look at that would be that the state is the floor. So you can't go less restrictive than the state. And then you see a lot of counties and cities, you know, are the ceiling, so to speak, as the lower bodies that are going stricter. For example, some counties are making what's statewide guidance, you know, into mandatory requirements in their county. That's pretty common. So that's kind of an easy way to think about it.
Right.
But it really is, it's a lot of moving parts and they're constantly changing. And so to be keeping track of, you know, all these different layers of government, if you have multiple locations too, you might have different rules for one franchisee than another. It's a lot to keep track of. It's keeping folks in my line of work busy.
Right. Well, and you were suggesting to me, just because of this, those clients of yours that you have in multiple jurisdictions, be it multiple cities or multiple counties, that in fact you can create that matrix you suggested for every one of them, depending upon where they happen to fit. If they're all in California, but in 2 different counties, you need kind of 2 sets of guidelines for opening business, right?
Yep.
And you know, just a tidbit from one of my actual clients, you know, working on this issue that has facilities in LA, Orange County, San Diego, and in the Bay Area. They just said, we're going to go ahead and comply with the strictest county that we're in, and just do that everywhere as a best practice, rather than a hodgepodge of, you know, different regulations at different facilities. So while, you know, maybe that makes operations some more difficult for some people, you know, in counties where they could open up a bit more, you know, this particular client found the best way for their operation was to just have, you know, uniform guidelines across the state, just defaulting to the strictest.
You know, it seemed like most businesses wanted to open up, and as soon as they were given that green light, or maybe even a little before, a lot of businesses tried to leap forward and open up, but there's still a lot of businesses that are not. Certainly not open up to full occupancy, but even opening their doors to customers at all. I mean, if someone came to you right today and said, hey, I've been closed, my office or my retail store has been closed since March, what are the key things I need to think about in opening? What would you say? What is that list of key important things to consider?
So, you know, besides consulting your attorney, you know, due to this web of regulations we're dealing with, honestly, when I've had clients come to me that are reopening, the first place I start is the county public health website. And there I can see if the county has their own specific order, because some don't. Some just default to state law. And, you know, I'll take a look at that order and figure out, you know, what are the face covering rules for employees? What are the temperature checks? You know, in San Diego, temperature checks are required for everybody. All employees have to, you know, log and do temperature check when they get there. Some counties, you know, you can screen at home for symptoms. What are the signage requirements? Some counties have specific checklists you need to post at every entrance, and a number of, you know, very specific regulations regarding, you know, signs that say don't enter. You know, if you have symptoms, stay 6 feet apart, wear a face covering, that kind of thing. So I think when someone's thinking about reopening, you know, you just start with that county website, and that's going to take you to the state guidance. And, you know, the state of California has guidance documents for virtually every segment of the economy. And, you know, those vary, you know, very greatly, really, from, you know, retail to office to religious services. You're going to have different requirements. So, you know, you start with the county and then go to those state guidelines. And I think the best way to do that is to contact someone like us who has a working familiarity with that and can walk businesses through that. Because I think doing so on your own is extremely challenging, and it's been made that way, frankly, by all the different government bodies.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. You know, and I guess I know your expertise goes beyond Orange County, but in Orange County, you guys live in Orange County, your firm is headquartered in Orange County. The majority of people on this call are from Orange County. So maybe you could just tell me where do we stand in Orange County in terms of a business, in terms of putting signs on my window, the attesting to certain things that I must post, disinfectant bottles, temperature gauges, masks in my workplace. What about some of those things that all of us are dealing with that you can give us any thoughts on?
Yeah, sure. So, generally speaking, Orange County has defaulted to state law. There are some specific orders, but that's the general rule. They don't have a detailed public health officer order like some other counties do. So then we're left with the industry by industry guidance. But I would say generally speaking, statewide face coverings are now required in the workplace. When you're in a common area, are going to be within 6 feet of someone else. If you're in your own office, not required. There are, requirements for signage. There's not a specific checklist in Orange County like in other counties, but there, you're going to want to post signage that, like what I said earlier, wear a face covering, don't enter if you have symptoms, and stay 6 feet apart. Depending on the industry, there might be some, markings that need to be made with respect to social distancing. And then in Orange County, employees need to self-screen. So you don't need to take your temperature when you get somewhere, but they need to be self-screening at home for symptoms and then not come to work if they have symptoms. And the employees, that all needs to be communicated very clearly to them, of course. And I think it's very important. Rule number one, I think, well, I don't know if it's rule number one, but a very important rule for employers is to make sure they make crystal clear to their employees that they are not to show up if they have any symptoms.
Yeah. So let's say an employee does have a symptom. What is the and the employer has told that all employees that they're not to come to work if they have any symptoms. What then can the employer do in addressing that?
If the employee shows up with those symptoms, is that what you're saying?
With, let's say, one of the
right.
COVID.
I think they need to tell that person to go home. That's the easiest answer. And the state actually has a lot of guidance about what to do with positive tests and symptoms where there's been no test. And basically that person needs to stay home at least 3 days, until at least 3 days after there's been no symptoms, and 10 days have passed since the symptoms first appeared. That's the state guidance. So
say that again. So if someone stays home because they exhibit any of the COVID symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, I see that list from CDC is getting longer and longer of symptoms.
Yeah.
So I don't know how you could not have one of them. But anyway, that's
right.
a secondary point. So if you have one of those symptoms, employee stays home, the state guidelines is what?
So the state guidelines is you stay home from 10 days since the first day you had symptoms, and at least 3 days after the symptoms have passed, which is defined as typically there's no more fever without any fever reducing medications and no respiratory symptoms. The wrinkle there is that's the guidance for if you've tested positive, but it's also the guidance for if you're symptomatic but haven't been tested. So the way to get around that long period would be, encourage your employee to get tested and then hopefully get a negative result.
So we as an employer could say, you go home or you don't come to work if you have a COVID symptoms, primarily fever and other breathing issues or something, right? Those
right.
are the critical factors.
Respiratory, right.
Then you have a timeline, or you can, as an employer, can I require people to be tested to come back to work?
No, you can't require the testing. There's the ability to refuse the testing.
Mm-hmm.
And
right. So I'll have to use that guidance in the office.
And on that point, I think there's a lot of issues dealing with what happens if someone was at work when they were symptomatic, or was at work and turns out they tested positive. Then you're delving into the HIPAA world, where you have to inform potential other employees that they were around someone that tested positive while still maintaining confidentiality. about your individual employee that did test positive. You can't reveal names. And I think that the advice I see us give and our clients follow to the most part is just, keep the news to the in an organization-wide email or anything like that. I think that's probably counterproductive.
All right, you buzzed out there for a second, so
sorry about that.
No. Just say that last two sentences again.
Right. So I would just say keep communications. I think the best practice would be to keep communications to the direct contacts and those people at risk, rather than, if you have a large organization, some organization-wide email about positive tests. I don't think that's required, and it could be counterproductive.
Yeah. So one of the things on my blog posts, I have written a couple that people think are crazy, but I do think you can use this time of executive order to during a time of emergency to pass executive orders on a state or local level that might help business, and it might encourage things to get done easier. And I think we have a question here that really talks about, there was a bill in the legislature, SB 939, that did get killed, which basically gave some flexibility or right to tenants to walk away from commercial leases altogether. Are there any government entities out there that are actually taking that executive order step on their own without that underlying legislation? I mean, the legislation would have affected everybody in the state, but are there any cities or communities you see that are in fact doing that already?
I'll let Alisha take this one because I think she has direct experience with exactly what you're asking. So go ahead, sorry.
So I do a lot of work in LA County, which I think has been one of the more aggressive counties in terms of trying to protect tenants and help tenants through this. But I have not seen anything that goes as far as SB 939 would have gone at a local level, like a county or a city. I have sat through council meetings where we've had residents come and say, "City, will you take this up?" So far, I have not seen an appetite. And frankly, I think SB 939 was going to be a challenge because it would have been legislation that dictates a private transaction or a private lease, and that's something that's very difficult to do.
I think the Constitution.
I think there's possibly some constitutional issues with that. So
bridging contracts.
What I do see, though, short of something like that, where the government says you have a right to renegotiate your lease, I see a ton of efforts by the city to do whatever it can to help tenants. For instance, if the city is serving as a landlord, I've seen cities give rent relief. I've seen cities give CARES Act funding for commercial tenants to try to cover the cost of rent while they're closed. I think cities really are bending over backwards to try to help their businesses that are tenants.
Well, see, I actually think that's an important thing. I wish people would brainstorm what cities could do to help business more. And I think there's a question out here that really talks about getting ghost kitchens established. In other words, how to address some of these closures by opening up a kitchen or a restaurant quickly as a part of maybe a bar or as a part of another establishment. That process pretty much is all controlled locally by city permitting and county permitting. Would there be anything, for example, that would restrict a city to be able to allow for, pop-up restaurants in any zone? I mean, the emergency powers now should allow that, right?
Yeah, I think what I've seen a number of things. You see a lot of cities allowing the temporary use permits, obviously, for the parking lot dining at restaurants. Expanding into the street, even in Laguna Beach. I've heard about that.
Focus on Laguna Beach. They're doing a great job.
Yeah, and I can't wait to check that out. And I think one tool that some cities are used, frankly, in addition to fast tracking permits and waiving business license fees, doing things like that, is frankly looser code enforcement, where they're simply not going to shut down businesses that come up with their creative idea, and they're gonna. I think I've seen a lot of cities willing to work with their business community because of course cities are getting sales tax, so I think there's a big motivation
If a restaurant came to the city, the city manager's office or whoever, and said, "I've got this great idea. How can we do this?" I think a lot of cities would be happy to help. And and there are. So another thing is there's a lot of publicity about the CARES Act, but many cities are actually creating their own local business loan programs. For example, I'm the city attorney in the city of Poway in San Diego County, and they put up $2 million of just general fund, emergency reserve money to give out loans. I know Newport Beach has a loan program. A number of other cities do as well. So something to look out for, because I think that's been lost in the shuffle a little bit when you're talking about all the federal dollars that have come in.
Well, that's a good question. For example, a lot of counties have those funds that come in through the CARES Act. Counties decide how they wish to distribute them to businesses for local business support. In Orange County, I guess, in 3 supervisorial districts, the program's administered and run through the county. In the other 2, Don Wagner's district and Michelle Steele's district, those dollars were sent to cities to be able to create those types of creative loan or grant programs. So one, is that what you're talking about, Alan? Those types of?
So yes, but there's also cities that are doing it out of their own funds, so not CARES Act funds. So you might be able, some of those programs, I know that if you get CARES Act funding, you're not eligible, but it might be an easier process if you look at your local city and see if they have some sort of program. I think like we both talked about earlier, we need to be looking at city, county, and statewide, not only regulations, but also see what programs are there to help. Right. And just to totally change the topic, I saw this question come in about employees testing positive, and I just want to make crystal clear, definitely, and we need to inform staff that are potentially exposed. All I was saying is that if you have members of your organization that were not anywhere near that person, they don't necessarily need to be informed. So again, employers definitely notify all employees who are potentially exposed to the person tested positive. So I want to make sure you do that before we finish.
So if your organization is in one building and all employees somewhat interact with each other, yes, you need to make sure they're all informed. But if they're in multiple buildings or multiple cities and they don't necessarily interact, that's what you're pointing to.
Or someone that works out in the field, maybe doesn't come into the home office, something like that.
Oh, I see. Good. Actually, I wanted to finish up a point, because some of those CARES Act grants that cities and counties are providing, there has been a question out there, maybe you don't know the answer, but maybe we can find it out if you don't, that you can't go after those local like $10,000 business grants if you got a PPP loan or another SBA loan. Is that restriction there, or are people just using that as a filter?
I think it's jurisdiction by jurisdiction. I can tell you in the city of Poway, just because I'm familiar with their program. If you have a PPP loan, you are not eligible, because the idea for that program was to bridge businesses until they could get a PPP loan. So they're no double dipping, so to speak.
But you're specifically talking about that Poway general fund, not Poway money from the county of San Diego.
That's right. But I think each program has been designed slightly differently depending on how it's implemented.
Okay. And
up to whoever is administering the CARES Act program. And so I know a lot of agencies have made that a condition of being eligible, is that you haven't gotten money from another source, because they want to spread out the funding to as many businesses as they can.
Yeah, a couple of them that I'm aware of, for example, in Orange County, the county is overseeing the administration of those dollars for businesses that are in the 4th district, which is Fullerton, Anaheim, Orange, and in the 5th district, which is the south part of Orange County. I understand that they have extended the deadline for businesses who are seeking those $10,000 grants, because they didn't have enough applicants. Now the deadline, I hear, was extended to this Sunday. So I've never seen a deadline that ends on a Sunday, but Sunday at 5 o'clock. So if any business out there that's in any of those cities might have interest, you can contact our office or the County Board of Supervisors. I also heard in the county of Riverside, they originally had that PPP SBA restriction on going after those dollars, but they also didn't get enough participants, so they have taken away that restriction. So people may want to look into that as well. So, Adam, you're prolific with your questions. Let me see. is there anyone working with school districts traditionally close to their camp to open their grounds during summer months? Yeah, that is such an interesting question. What do you envision? I mean, you aren't necessarily giving advice to school districts to tell them how they can get kids back on campus in terms of having those campuses available as community recreation areas and things like that. Those are certainly challenging questions, but every single business person listening in right now has an employee or a friend that has kids at home. And what do you think is going to happen in the fall with going back to school? I mean,
I've been paying close attention to this. I have 2 kids that aren't school age, but I know that that's been a challenge from a personnel standpoint, because every single school district has a completely different plan on how it's going to bring people back. And so your workforce in terms of childcare is going to be dramatically different, and trying to coordinate who can come to work and when, versus almost inevitably a lot of parents are going to be doing sort of a hybrid mix of kids going to school and kids homeschooling. So trying to accommodate that when your workforce probably has kids in different school districts, or even within one school district, an elementary school might have a different schedule or plan than a middle school. It's going to be a quagmire trying to work that all out and have parents who are working, kids who are in school and learning, and make sure everybody's got childcare. We
shouldn't tell the secret, but all 3 of us are sitting in front of a green screen, so to speak, with our own preferred background. So we're all trying to fake it out to say, this is where I am at this moment in time. But in fact, that's might be how work is conducted, at least through 2020 in some fashion. Alisha, you were going to share, we were talking earlier about one of the governor's executive orders, which to me is kind of scary. It really basically extends it addresses workers' comp and those people who get COVID, and moves the presumption to say, if they're in a business, the presumption is they got COVID at the business.
Yep, and just briefly, I'm sure most folks are aware that if an employee is injured at work, they're entitled to workers' compensation. With this executive order, what it says is if you, from March 19th through July 5th, so it expires this Sunday, if you have an employee that's working outside of the home and they happen to get COVID, they are entitled to a rebuttable presumption that they got COVID at work and are entitled to workers' comp for that. How you rebut that presumption is unclear. There is a section of the executive order that says it can be rebutted with other evidence, and things like contact tracing might help with that. The other part of the order is that normally you'd have 90 days to dispute a workers' comp claim or reject a workers' comp claim. For these COVID-related claims, you only have 30 days. And so that's due to expire. It hasn't been extended yet. There was an executive order that came out this morning that extended a whole slew of prior orders, and this was not one of them. So my guess is that it'll probably expire on Sunday. But be aware that if you have folks who are working right now outside of their homes, even after July 5th, you might still be getting claims because they could have contracted COVID during a period where they were eligible under this order for workers' comp.
So the order extends to anyone who may have or who has contracted COVID prior to the July 5th time.
Right, and it goes from 14 days of a day when you worked outside your home. So if you worked outside your home on, I guess, let's say July 4th, and you get COVID within 14 days of July 4th, you would be covered by this executive order.
Those are all scary thoughts. And, you know, I guess it's good to have access to an attorney. When is the best time to consult an attorney on any of these potential employment or regulatory issues?
I think the best time to reach out to us is when you're going to make a change in your operations. If you're going to reopen, you need to probably speak with an attorney that's familiar with all these regulations, and labor and employment attorneys as well, which we have here at Rutan and Tucker. Or if you're going to ramp up in any way, I think whenever this new, in this new normal, as it's always being called, when we're going to adjust business practices, I think that's the time to talk to someone, because you can, within an hour or 2 hour conversation now, you can save many hours of headaches and costs down the road.
I think also one caution I would give is if you come up with an issue, like I've dealt with tons and tons of personnel issues since COVID started, where you have an employee who feels really strongly about masks working next to an employee who feels like they shouldn't have to wear a mask, or they have a disability so they can't wear a mask. How do you navigate that? Or you have an employee who feels like they should be able to work remotely because they're scared to come to work. They don't want to be exposed, but they're not necessarily in a risk category. All of those are really, really tough to navigate. And I think it's good to get an attorney's, it doesn't have to be us, but get an attorney's opinion just to make sure. We do have that experience, but run it by an attorney first, because you can end up, like Ellen said, on the hook for lots more money if you handle it incorrectly. And
I see some message to all panelists. Let's end this on a positive note here. And I completely agree. We, as attorneys, when you're talking to us, it's usually not the best conversation you've had in your life, and that's the unfortunate part of the job. You wouldn't be talking to an attorney if everything went right. But I think this atmosphere is from what I've seen, is a time for business owners that we can get creative and potentially cut some red tape. To kind of circle back to what I talked about earlier a little bit, I think cities, we're talking about local government, are really hungry to help out their local business community, because most city government folks are part of that community, and they rely on it. It's a lifeblood. So as someone who we both work in city halls and with city officials every day, I see that personally, and I know that if you come up with a creative idea and bring it to your local government folks, I think that it's going to be received much more positively than ever before, because everyone knows we're sort of all in this together in a way. Everyone knows that the city knows they need you all. So I would say think about that and use that. And secondly, just aside from that, I think it's a good opportunity to talk about maybe some people are going to work remotely permanently, and you can make some changes all over your organization that's going to make it leaner and better ultimately. So let's have a great weekend.
Very good. And we should all focus on freedom this weekend. So even though we haven't been able to focus on that much, I think now's the right time to do that. So Alan and Alicia with Rutan and Tucker, thank you so much. I think Amanda's going to post a closing screen for everybody to see. But I want to thank all of the participants for joining in. I wanted to make sure everybody had an opportunity to have contact information. And if you would like to contact any of us, you can do that at these phone numbers, at these emails directly. Again, I want to thank Alan and Alicia for being here, and all of you who've participated today. Thanks.